In this video, I'm going to show you guys how to use the Jambmaster system for setting doors. And you'll see it behind me. It's a pretty awesome jig. It's fun to use. And if you use it properly, door setting can go really fast and really precise. A couple of the things we're going to need in order to use it properly. One is a hot glue gun. I like the Fasten Master. The glue sticks that you can get for this, these ones set up in 40 seconds. Which is fantastic because I don't have to wait for glue to dry and come back at another time. Another thing you'll need is a router. This one has a 1/2-inch bit with a bushing. The bigger the bit you get, the better, because it's less passes you have to make back and forth. And then you'll need a ton of blocks. So these are made out of MDF, and I've got a bunch of different sizes. I've got 1/4 inch, 3/8, 1/2 inch, 5/8, and 3/4. So normally we just have somebody come into the shop and make buckets of these, so that way they're ready to go anytime we need to go out in the field and use it. So take this apart, you just loosen up these knobs, slide them out, and they've actually got a notch that catches over this template. Pretty awesome. Set those aside, and there's 2 clips. So you slide the extensions out of here. You got a little tool in the slot by the level. Take that out. Set this up. I'm going to take this slot with the adjustment knob on the inside, same side as these templates. I'm going to slide it into here. Get about flush on the bottom there. I'll tighten these down. Yeah, I'll do the same on the other side. And the top is the same as the bottom. I'm just going to loosen up these screws. Slide this in with the adjustment knob towards the inside. To get my shim layout, I'm just going to go ahead and measure all my hinges and where I want the shims to be. So for the bottom hinge, I'm going to shim right behind it. So I'm going to put this one at about 10. And my middle hinge, I'll put that shim at about 40. And then my top 2 shims, I'll put this one at, I'll say 69.5. And this one up here at about 75.5. Now I'll take those numbers and transfer them over to the Jambmaster. So make sure you hook onto the bottom here, taking into account finished floor, subfloor, whatever you're going to be sitting on. So I'm just going to mark these out: 10, 40, 69.5, and 75.5. I'm just going to loosen all these up and slide them back and forth till I get them where I want. And the marks that I made are the center of where I want the shim, so I'm actually going to line my mark up with these bolts. So if you need to move one of these from down here, say up here, you do not have to take all these off and slide them out. All you have to do is loosen the bolts and give it a twist, and it'll come right out. And stick it up here, turn it back down, tighten the bolts. I've got all the templates laid out, and I laid them out for the hinge side. I did both sides the exact same. So on the strike side, that means I've got a possibility of shimming here, right here, and down here. So what I like to do is shim above and below the strike. So I'm actually going to add one more somewhere around down there, and I'm going to do it for both sides. So that way, no matter if I'm hanging a right-hand swing or a left-hand swing, I can put the shims where they need to be. Once we have the Jambmaster out of the box and assembled and all of our router templates adjusted for where we want the shims at. Next, we have to adjust the width of it. And to do that, we're going to take a measurement of our door. I've got a jamb mocked up over here. So I'm just going to measure the head of the jamb outside to outside. This one is 33.5 heavy. So I'm probably going to go 33 9/16 just to give myself a 30-second worth of play. And if I have, let's say, 10 2/8 doors, I'm going to go ahead and measure a few of them to kind of get an overall idea of what the width is, because sometimes they will vary depending on who you get your doors from, what type of quality doors they are. So I will measure them. I'll take the widest one and add maybe a 30 seconds. That way I know all of these doors are going to fit in the opening. If I measure the smallest one, then of course the fattest one is not going to fit. The way to adjust the width for your jamb on your Jambmaster is this knob right here in the center. You loosen that up so this can slide freely back and forth. And then since I've got a 2/8 door, I'm going to pull this pin out, and there are actually numbers on the top side here. And one of them says 2'8", so I'm going to put this pin right over that number. Stick it in there, slide it back together, and just kind of snug this knob down a little bit. And then I'm going to take my tape measure and I'm going to run it through the template guide. I'm going to hook it on the outside of the little flange lip. I'm going to measure the other flange. And I'm at 33 9/16 light. So what I need to do is I need to adjust this slightly. So there is a micro knob right on the inside here. We're going to take our tool that comes supplied, and I'm going to turn that just a slight bit. Slide it back together, snug the knob down, and then run my tape back through. And I need just a little bit more, so I'll loosen that up. Turn this a little bit more. And now I have 33 9/16 outside of the flange to outside. So if you find yourself in between sizes, rather than trying to adjust this little screw out all the way, all you have to do is take this, spin it around, and you gain a 1/2 inch that way. And I'm going to do the same thing to the bottom side, outside of the flange to outside of the flange. I'm going to adjust this till I get to 33 9/16. Now the Jambmaster is all set up. We've got our heights for all of our shims. We've got the width for our door set. So all we're going to do is take this, stick it in the opening, like that. And then we have a level on this side. And that's going to tell us if we're too far left, too far right, how we need to adjust it. And it's real simple. All we're going to do is take these adjustment knobs, and I'm just going to touch the 2x4. I'm going to take this other top one to where it is just touching bottom knobs. Get those just a little tight, just barely. So now looking at the bubble, I can see the jig needs to go to the left a little bit. So I'm going to loosen up the left one and tighten up the right. And then I'm going to keep doing that until I get this thing perfectly plumb. Okay, it's plumb, so I'm going to snug these down. You want them snug, but you do not want them tight. Because if you tighten them too much, it's going to push your Jambmaster out of square, and it could even start bowing these rails. And you definitely don't want that, because then you're going to have a crooked door. So now we have to adjust the centers. And these are basically just threaded rods. As you're adjusting these center ones, I like to get it to where it's touching, and then give it a little tap, back it out, and then just barely touch it. You do not want to crank it in, because then you will bow out your jamb. So you just want it to touch. And what that does when I give it a little smack is it creates an indentation right here. So now as I'm routing, I'm not pushing into the soft part of the wood. This is setting on a semi-solid surface, and now it's not going to push in as I'm routing and get my blocks all off. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to snug it up, and you just barely want this touching the wood. You do not want to tighten it, because the slightest bit of pressure is going to bow this rail out, and then you're going to have a bowed jamb. And just make a little indentation into the wood, and then just barely touch it. So now the Jambmaster's in there nice and plumb, and we're ready to glue some blocks on. Another key thing to remember is you want this all the way up against your drywall. I don't have any drywall because this is a mock-up opening, but you want to make sure that it is in there and it is tight all the way down this thing. Because if you don't, then it's going to get cockeyed and your blocks are not going to be square with the open. Another important thing to remember while setting this up is I have the bar on the hinge side. So this is the barrel side of the hinge. And I do that because when I'm routing, these may flex a little bit as I'm pushing on the router. If I push too much, they may flex. Well, I don't want that to flex any on the hinge side, because that's going to throw my hinges off. If it flexes a little bit on the other side, you're never going to see it. It's not going to make that much of a difference. And if it does, you can shim it just a little bit. So I always want to make sure that the rail is on the barrel side of the hinges when I'm setting the template up. So now the Jambmaster is set in the opening. It's plumb. Everything's tightened properly. And I know where I want all my shims. So I'm going to start hot gluing the blocks on. So I've got a few different sizes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the smallest shim and I'm going to try and slide it under the flange, the one that I was measuring off of for the door width. I'm going to slide in between that and the 2x4, and if it goes in between, it's too small of a block. So I'm going to step up one size. And I'm going to check that, and that one fits just fine. So I'm going to actually take it, set it on that flange, and it's just going to hang out there for now. And I'm going to fit every single one, find all the blocks, that way I can go through and hot glue everything all at the same time. And this also helps me to determine where I want these, because I know that this side is my hinge side and this side is the latch side, so I know where I want these blocks on this side, above and below top hinge. I've got the middle hinge right here, so I'm going to put that one in here, and then I've got my directly behind the bottom hinge there, so I'm going to do that one. And then over here is the strike side, so I'm going to go above and below the strike. I'm going to put one down here, and then I've got one up here. And you want to make sure you're using the smallest block as possible, because there's no sense in routing out 5/8 of an inch of block when a 1/4 inch block will work just fine. You just got to take off 1/8. Now when you're checking these to see if they fit between the 2x4 and the flange, one thing you have to watch out for is a twisted cripple. So as you can see, it fits here, but when I go back there, it does not fit. It goes in between. So when I route this, I'm going to have a dead space back here, and my jamb is not going to set perfectly square. So that means I have to up my size of block to where it fits. So now I've got all my blocks laid out, and the reason there's so many of these templates on here is because, like I said before, we can set it up so the hinge is on your left or the hinge is on your right. It doesn't matter. All of these will work on both sides. So these two are above and below top hinge, or this one can be just the top side of the latch side. And I've got one in the middle here for the latch side. And then I've got an above and below the latch. And this one here is below the middle hinge. And then I've got one down here that is behind the bottom hinge. And that one also works over here for the bottom side of this jamb. And now I've got all the blocks laid out, so I'm going to start hot gluing them on, and by the time I get down to the other side, the first one will be ready to route. The blocks are all laid out, ready to glue on. I've got my hot glue gun. It is hot. So I'm going to take my block, I'm going to apply some glue to it, I'm going to apply quite a bit of glue because it's better to have too much glue than not enough glue. I'm just going to slide it in there, put some pressure, and I'm going to hold it in place just for about 5 seconds. And now it's set up enough I can let go and move on to the next block. And always keep an extra glue stick on you because you run out at the worst times. I've got all my blocks glued on, and since this is 40-second set time glue, I'm pretty much ready to go because it took me about a minute to get all the way around, and these things are hardened and they are ready to route. So we want to make sure our router is set up properly, and the very tip of this router needs to be flush with the flange. So I'm going to adjust this. I'm going to stick this in one of these templates, and I'm going to adjust it back and forth until the tip of my bit is flush with the back side of this flange. So this is the back side of the flange right here, and that's right where I want my bit flush with. I'll unlock my router. It's unplugged, and I'm just going to get this nice and flush with the edge of that. And lock it down. Plug my router in, and we are ready to go. So there's a couple things you got to do to use the router properly, not damage your jig, and not damage your router either. So I've got a bushing on here, 1/2-inch bit, and what I'll do is I'll start usually on the non-frame side, and I will tilt it that way because that kind of sets my router instead of tipping in. Some people try and do it this way, and then they slide, and then they hit the edge of this, and then they screw up the template. So I like to go to the right. It kind of plants it in there, and then I will slowly drop it in after I turn the router on and work it back and forth because this is not a plunge bit that I have on here. So it doesn't plunge the best, so you kind of have to work your way back and forth until you get it all the way in there. And then instead of routing the block off, since this is a 1/2-inch bit, I can't do the whole block in one pass. So I found instead of going back and forth, it actually kind of wants to eat into the block and then take you all over the place. So I'll kind of plant my right hand, and I'll use my left hand to move up and down, and I will use that motion all the way across. So instead of routing side to side, I'm routing up and down, and I will slide all the way across that way until the whole block is routed off. And then after you're done, make sure you turn your router off, and you wait completely until your bit stops turning, because if you don't and you go to pull this off, you're probably going to nick this side and mess up your router template. So I've got my depth set correctly, all the blocks are glued on, we're ready to route. Make sure you've got your eye protection on. Like I said, I'm going to start with the right side planted down, and I'm going to drop it in, working it up and down, and I'm going to use that same up and down motion, working my way all the way to the outside of the block. Make sure the bit's fully stopped, and we can pull it out. And look at that, worked perfectly. So I've got all the blocks routed, and one thing I suggest is taking like a handheld blower and just kind of blowing this off real quick, or a vacuum, because if you don't, you're going to pull it out and you're going to tip it, and dust is going to fall all over you, and you're going to get a bunch in your eyes, and you're not going to be happy. Removal of this is pretty simple. All we have to do is loosen up everything. Make sure you keep a hand on it so it doesn't fall out, and just slide it on out. So we're going to look at a couple things here. One of them, as you can see, if I put my square on here, I have this big gap. and that's because I did not have the proper size block in here. It did not slide between the flange and the 2x4 on this side, but I did not check this side, so it slid right through, and that's what's going to create that. So now my jamb is not going to sit flat on there. That's why you have to check both sides, because this cripple is so twisted, like most of them are, you're not going to get a proper fit just checking one side. So as you can see with this block, it's got a nice little arch in it, and that happened because I didn't double check everything, and this guy right here, the center support, was in the way. So my router hit this, rode over it, and created that. So just make sure that you check all your clearances and everything. You know, I could have bumped this down to here. It still would have worked just fine, and it would have been out of my way. So another great thing about the Jambmaster, as you can see, all these wedge shapes, that's because this cripple was not square with the opening. It was actually twisted. So when I put it in here, it squares it off with the opening. So I got a nice flat edge. And when I go to put the jamb in, everything's going to be nice, square, and plumb. Okay, now I've got everything routed out. All of my shims are routed. Everything's looking good. I can take my jamb and slip it right in the hole, and it fits pretty good. So what I will do is I will go on the hinge side, and I will nail this side off right against those shims, because I know these shims are square with the opening, and everything's plumb because I set it up that way. So I can just go ahead and nail these off. That side's done. I will hang the door, and then I will come over to the latch side, and I will shim this out, because I've got maybe a 1/16 of play in this, which is what I want, because if I'm setting multiple doors, the door sizes vary. So some will fit perfectly in this opening, and others will need maybe a 1/16 heavy of shimming to get it just right. So I'll hang the door, I'll close it, and then I will check my reveal here, and I'll just put a little bit of a shim in there just to get my reveal right, nail that off, and the door's set.